All right, good morning. I will call the, golly, what day is it? January 13th meeting of the Curriculum Instruction Committee to order. Good morning, everyone. Okay, let's see. So we have the agenda. Whoops. And I'm going to move on. Is there any public comment, Dr. Cuppett?
A few minutes ago, there was none, and I'll confirm with Ms. Raines that there's not been any that's come in recently. Is that right, Ms. Raines?
That's correct. No public comment.
No public comment then.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, the minutes stand approved. Next is board member comments. Ms. Johnson or Mr. Johnson, do you have any comments you'd like to make at this time?
Happy Wednesday.
No comment, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions as we move on. So we're going to move into our items, and I will turn it over to Dr. Cuppett to introduce us to World Language Update.
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone. As I've shared recently at meetings, one of the things that we do here in the C&I committee is bring periodic updates related to our content areas, our programming that's occurring throughout the district, and we have 3 presentations today that'll do that. I'm happy to introduce Dwayne Cash, who is our curriculum specialist for world languages, and he handles our programming in middle and high school in multiple languages, and it's always an honor to hear from him. And so he's going to give us an update on where we are with world languages. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Cash. Thank you, Dwayne.
He might be waiting for his presentation to come up. But...
Yeah, I think so. And I will let the committee know we have had some quirkiness with things like Google Chrome today. So Dwayne, if for some reason it won't come up for you, I can always pull it up here on this side. So just let me know.
Yeah, because I'm hitting share, Kevin, and it's not.
All right, let me give it a shot. Yeah.
Dr. Harris, I guess I need the trick for that one.
Well, if it's okay with the folks, because I'm not being able to pull it up either from here. I do know that our friends at Frederick High, Dr. Francisquina and Kathleen have theirs, and it's shared earlier. If you want, we could flip the agenda while Mr. Cash and I work on the technical side. Is that okay?
That is certainly fine with me, as long as Mr. Cash is amenable. I think that would be a great idea.
All right, great. Thank you. So I'll turn this over now to Kathleen Chappelle, our Director of High Schools here in Frederick County Public Schools, and Dr. Francisquina is the principal at Frederick High School. And he and I have spent a lot of time together in the last couple of years working through the LINKS program, and they're going to give an update on Frederick High's competency-based education. So I'll turn it over to them, and I'll go work on technical stuff.
Sure. And Ms. Chappelle, I'm going to present right now.
Good morning, everyone. Ms. Yoho, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Johnson, committee members. Dr. Francisquina and I are happy to be here this morning to bring you an update on the competency-based education initiative at Frederick High School, we refer to as CBE. As you know, the newly constructed Frederick High opened its doors in the fall of 2017 and introduced a unique approach to the high school experience that we call LINKS, or Linking Youth to New Experience. There are 4 important elements of LINKS that you see depicted on the screen. Our focus today is on innovative learning and an update for competency-based education. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Francisquina to run us through.
Thank you, Ms. Chappelle. And I am just using one screen. So right now, all I can see is the PowerPoint presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to break in and I will answer them as we go. So competency-based education is a philosophy, and what you can see in front of you, this is the core philosophy of competency-based education. This is something that we came up with about 4 or 5 years ago as a public-facing document that we could show to parents and community members as an introductory of what competency-based education is. Step one is the learning process. That has not changed. So when we talk about learning, the teacher is presenting a piece of content to a student, and then the student works through it, whether it's classwork, homework, class discussion, all that good stuff that comes with the learning activities. Then we move on to an assessment. That is nothing different than what has been done. The assessment could be a formative assessment, so a teacher can get data to see where their class is, or it could be a summative assessment because we've gotten to the end of a learning cycle and it's time to check to see how students are doing before we move on to the next topic. Where things start to get a little bit different in a competency-based education environment is the next phase. It's the help phase, particularly with a summative assessment. So a teacher were to give a formative assessment, teacher looks at the data and says, okay, here's where my students are. This is what I need to provide for them so we can get to the end of the unit and they can show mastery. If it's a summative assessment, instead of just moving on to the next thing, a teacher looks at the assessment scores, looks at the data from that summative, and says that, David is ready to move on, but Kathleen needs just a little bit more help in this one area here. So the teacher would work with Kathleen to help fill in the gaps. So when Kathleen moves on to the next unit, Kathleen is ready. We're trying to get rid of the calendar dictating when it's time to move on. And we want to focus on the individual student when it's time to move on. And then after that help phase, that's when the grade actually goes into the grade book. So when we talk about summative assessments, the first grade is not necessarily the final grade. We give students the opportunity to reassess on summative assessments. So we leave that grade open in the grade book so the student has multiple opportunities to show mastery and improve upon their grade. Another thing that we believe with competency-based education is the grade should be a pure reflection of the academic progress of the student. So we still believe that we need to provide students and parents feedback on how students are doing in things like independence, effort in class, attendance, social responsibilities. Those are very important, and we don't just want to push them to the side. That they need to be a part of the conversation, but they don't need to be in the academic grade. An example that I could give you, how many times do we hear from students that leave us, I got a B or I got a C in the class, but now that I'm in college, I have to take a remediation course. Well, when we start to dig into that B or the C, how much of that grade was based on the student came to class every day, or was based on a homework completion grade and not necessarily on the content of the homework? So again, we want to make sure that grade is a purely academic reflection on where the students are. But we don't want to put to the side the importance of the habits of work. So what we have done is we have come up with this habits of work rubric, and this is half of it, and I'll show you the other half in a second. And what teachers do in Schoology, they pick one category per week and they mark down a 1 to 4, 1 being emergent, 4 being exemplary. And then at the end of the semester, at the end of the term and at midterm, in conjunction with the report card, we also send home a separate sheet to parents that has the rubric on it, and it spells out, this is your student's habits of work score in each class. It gives parents and students a little bit more qualitative feedback. Before we had habits of work, really the only formal qualitative feedback we could give were the comments in the report card. This gives parents a little bit more robust view on how their student is doing. So it answers the age-old question, a parent sees a C on a report card. Well, why do you have the C? You ask any teenager, I don't know. This gives the parent a little bit more information. So you may have a C, but they see that on their habits of work, hey, I notice on attendance, it's just approaching. Why is that? It's a great primer to the conversation with the teacher or with the student. And here is the second half of the habits of work rubric. So you can see we're looking at independence, perseverance, efforts in class, attendance, and social responsibility. It is important to remember with habits of work, this is something that does not go in the student's cumulative folder. We do not send this information to colleges. It does not go in the transcript. This is purely information just that students, teachers, and parents can use, and it does not go beyond Frederick High School. The other thing that we use in a competency-based environment are standards and rubrics to grade those standards. Our standards are firmly based in the approved Frederick County Public Schools curriculum, and they are designed by Frederick High School teachers in conjunction with our friends in the CII department. So we're not an island to ourselves here at Frederick High School. Everything we do is based in the approved curriculum with the support of downtown. It's also important to remember, even though the way that we build our lessons and we assess is slightly different, we are covering all the same content that is covered in any other high school in Frederick County Public Schools. So just because the way we approach the lesson is a little bit different doesn't mean we're going rogue on some of the content. We cover all the same content that is covered in any other Frederick County Public Schools. This year, about 60% of our courses are using CBE standards. We began last year with saying that all freshman classes would be CBE based in the rubrics and the standards. And then this year we said that not only are the freshmen, but also the sophomores need to be required to be based in CBE standards, giving teachers the caveat, if anybody was teaching a junior or a senior level course, they could opt in. And many of our teachers did opt in. Next year, our goal is 100% of the courses will be using CBE standards, with the exception of the dual enrollment courses, because grading standards and practices for those courses are determined by our friends at FCC, and advanced placement courses. We are using some of our CBE philosophy in the AP courses, such as common weighting in categories, and I'll get to that as we go through the progression, and allowing reassessment. However, the standards and rubrics that are used in the AP courses are the standards and rubrics that are created by the College Board, as they relate closely to those AP tests that the students take at the end of the AP course. An example of a competency in the standards can be seen here. This is competency 1 in our English courses, and these are all the performance standards that come below it. So each subject area has their own set of competencies and performance standards. So English has a set that they use. Math has a set that they use. So each English class uses the exact same competencies and rubrics, and that provides synergy between English 9, English 10, English 11, and English 12. So students can start working on a body of work. The grading is based on the same standards and rubrics as they progress through the course. So a lot of that time that's spent at the beginning of course trying to figure out, okay, how does this teacher grade? What is the vocabulary used in assessment? That's put to the side because the student gets used to it when they start on the 9th grade level. An example of a rubric can be seen here. So you can see how performance standard 1C, D, E, and F are graded. And this is another thing that our teachers working with our friends in CII work on. These standards and these rubrics are something that are looked at all the time, and we have adjusted them. A big adjustment you see in our rubrics as we start using them more and more is that for attainable. We say that a 3 is you've met standards, and a 4 is I've gone over and beyond standards. And what we're trying to do is make sure that idea of going over and beyond is still attainable by the student. One thing that we said at the beginning of our journey is it cannot be any harder or any easier to demonstrate mastery at Frederick High School, since we're using CBE, than it would be in any other school. So that's why this has been an ongoing progression, and it still goes on. As more teachers come on board, as we start putting in more classes, we start to look at things like, as you can see bolded here, what does identify mean? What does explain mean? Is analyze the right way to go? So this is something we have working on and we will continue to work on. We are committed to being transparent in our CBE journey, and part of that is we feel strongly that we need to keep the community as updated as we possibly can. A way of doing that is keeping all of our rubrics and our standards as front-facing for any community member to access whenever they want to. So if you go to our website, the Frederick High School website, all a parent needs to do is click on Parents and Students, go down to the CBE standards, and then they can click on whatever link they would want, and a PDF comes up for the most updated copy of the rubrics and standards. Students can also get rubrics and standards in their Schoology classroom, but by having them on our website, this is just a quicker way for parents to get it. And we also go through this when we do things like back to school nights, when we do links information nights for parents. We try to bring them here first because a lot of the questions can be answered just by looking at these standards and rubrics. So an emphasis on a common language, as I've said, the standards and rubrics help us with that. So when I moved from English 9 to English 10, I'm used to the assessment philosophy. I'm used to when a teacher says that this assignment is going to be based on standard 2A, they know what we're talking about. Another thing that we've done is we have normalized between all classes our weighting in the grade books. 90% of a student's grade is based on their summative score, 10% is the formative score. That is something that it's taken us about 2 years to develop. We feel strongly that if formative is truly practice and summative is the performance, that's where the majority of the weight of the grade goes to. Some classes at the beginning played around with making 100% summative and making the formative a 0% category. Some students struggled with, well, if I'm not getting a grade that's going to go into the grade book, I'm not going to do the work. So we still wanted to let a student see what their grade would be like if they didn't do the formative, but we still wanted 90% of that summative to be their grade. And we've also provided teachers with common language they can use in their course syllabi. And if I go to the next slide, you may be thinking, wow, 90% for a summative, that is quite a lot for a student's grade. Well, at Frederick High School, a summative test isn't a one and done experience. Students have the opportunities to reassess on summative assessments. So we have given teachers language that they can put into their syllabi. We have a Schoology group here that they can go in, click on syllabi, and there's some statements we have on grading, attendance, things like that, where they can just cut and paste and put it in there. So by putting this in, a student says that, if I want to reassess on an exam, I didn't do so well on it. First thing, I have to make sure I did all my formative work, because what we don't want is we don't want students not doing anything and then, okay, I'm going to wait and see what's on that summative test. Now I know what's on it. I'll just study for that, and then I'll just keep reassessing until I get there. No, you have to do all your practice work before you can take your summative assessment. And what they also have to do is they have to go through a relearn experience with the teacher. And that could be, I see that you didn't do so well on this form of the equation, so I'm going to give you a couple more practice equations. Or, I think what you need to do is go explore this topic, go to our Links Learning Lab after school and work with one of the teachers there. And then let's come back and have a conversation about it. One thing we've been working on with our teachers here is that relearn doesn't necessarily need to be, if you gave, and actually it shouldn't be, if you gave a multiple choice test and I got answers 2 and 3 wrong, I'm not going to give those same questions again, because that's not teaching a student about a topic. That's teaching a student that, hey, the right answer to question 2 is B. I'm just going to remember when I see it again, the answer is B. One thing that some of our teachers have seen great success on is the power of conversation and reassessment. So, David, I see that you said that, in this aspect of the Civil War, you didn't quite get this right. Tell me about, now that you've done this relearn experience, talk to me about, why did the North win? What were some factors that caused the Civil War, as opposed to just giving them another essay question? Some teachers feel strongly that if I gave an essay question, I want to give another essay question as a reassessment. What the reassessment looks like, that is something that the teacher and the student comes up together. We don't dictate what a reassessment needs to look like. One thing that we have noticed with this new, exciting online world that we are in, CBE teachers are actually a little bit a step ahead than the non-CBE teachers, because a CBE environment, it provides for more student choice, especially when you pair that with a blended environment. What I do is I tell the students, here are the performance standards we're going to look at. I'm going to talk to you about how the content we're going to focus on in this unit relates to the performance standard. Then I click on a choice board and I say, students, here's 5 different ways that you can work through the assignments. Some of it can be in group work, some of it can be on your own, some can be conferencing with me. What we're really seeing is when we do move to concurrent learning, where teachers are going to be working with students face-to-face and online at the same time, this again sets them up for success, because on my choice board, I have some things that my online students can do. I have some things that my face-to-face students can do, but whatever the learning task is, it's still based in that performance standard, and the kids can choose their path, how they get there, but the end result is exactly the same. So as we go on in CBE, we are committed to continual professional learning at Frederick High School. One thing we have found great success with, and something I am a firm believer of, it's the power of teachers teaching teachers. I remember when I was a teacher, very seldom did I want to go into an auditorium and the administrator is going to lecture at me for the next half hour about CBE and how it's going to be valuable in my classroom. And what does that administrator know? They don't even teach my subject area, and he taught it 15 years ago. So what we've done is we've formed something that we call the transformation team. It's led by a group of 4 teachers that are in the classroom, and they survey our staff quite often. What do you need help with? So we come up with custom PD for teachers based on their needs, based around the CBE framework. And we have seen great success in our feedback from teachers. Teachers appreciate the opportunity to learn from other teachers that are in the classroom, teaching the classes they are teaching, and actually making the professional development that we are delivering coming alive. Another thing that we do is we've had the opportunity to, because of some extra funding we get from Governor Hogan with links, we can bring teachers out of the classroom once a year, and we call it our CBE Summit. So we can cover them with substitutes, and we go to offsite. Usually it's been the Staff Development Center, or it's Mr. Concepcion at CTC has been very grateful of hosting us there. And for a day, we just conference and we talk about how's it going? Do we need to change this performance standard? Do we need to add this competency? It's been great to get teachers out of the building for a day where they can just talk with each other and conference. How's it going? How can we develop it? And this is where a lot of our work in the updates of our standards and rubrics come. ALP has also been, the accelerated learning process has also been a blessing, where teachers start the ALP session based on that performance standard, and how is this going to look in geometry? Geometry has been a good example. Our math specialist has been doing great work with our geometry teachers, because she's been able to do everything that's done in a traditional ALP session, but she's also been able to work with teachers. Okay, this is the first time that this geometry lesson has been taught with a CBE framework. How are we going to do it? And it's been at the table, well, the virtual table, with all the geometry teachers there. So teachers are working together to design the lesson. And then when the lesson is done, they're working together to debrief. And just, again, the power of teachers working with teachers has been phenomenal. And the other thing that we've used this year is a platform, LinkSpring, L-I-N-C, no pun intended. I kind of chuckle every time I see the difference between Link, L-I-N-C, and L-Y-N-X. But it is a platform that has sort of a choose your own adventure when it comes to PD. Teachers can go into it and they have the opportunity to, there's some CBE things in there, there's some digital learning things. It really is a choose your own adventure thing that teachers can use. And what's nice about LinkSpring is we've gotten it approved with our friends at MSDE. So if teachers work through X amount of modules in LinkSpring, they have the opportunity to earn MSDE credit for research on their certificates. LinkSpring comes at a cost. Again, we use some of the governor's budget to make that happen. We've been using LinkSpring for the past 2 or 3 years because we didn't have a learning management system that could accommodate that. But now that we've come on board with Schoology, our transformation team has already talked about, hey, we have the learning management system now, and we have a group of teachers that can make our own modules. Let's build it on our own, and put everything into Schoology. So we are having those conversations, and it's our goal is to start that up in the spring. So starting next school year, we can still give teachers the option of using an online platform that they can work at their own pace, but it's created by FCPS. And the nice thing would be, once we have it working at Frederick High School, we are very willing and excited to share with our colleagues in the other schools. So looking into the future, continued PL for staff coming on board in next school year. I would say that, like I say, 60% of our courses are being using CBE right now. About 75 to 80% of our teachers are using CBE, but we still have that 20% that have not come on board. So we need to spend some time onboarding them, getting them ready. So we're doing our job supporting them. Another exciting thing that we've been doing, working with our friends at the virtual school, is we've developing our own CBE online courses in Schoology. Right now, we are offering an online course for money finance and AS2. And CRD1. We are looking to add English 11 and FOT to that. And the exciting thing about doing this is if we have our own courses designed in-house, we don't need to pay for site licenses through virtual school. It's something that, again, we can start to house our own virtual experience at Frederick High School. And once we have it in order here, we will be sharing that with our friends in other schools. Our CRD course is already being shared throughout the county. So that's been really nice. Mike Watson has been great to work with. We don't just create the course and then go through it. There is vetting processes through the virtual school, and our friends in CII also look at it so we can make sure that the courses meet the performance standards and meet the curricular standards set by FCPS. We also have a group of teachers working, we call it our mastery tracking group, working to develop a CBE report card. We're still a couple years out because when we do go front facing with a CBE report card, we want to be sure that what we have is an accurate representation of what we have right now. We believe that the Schoology platform will give us everything we need to make that happen. But right now we're creating sample CBE report cards so we can see if this visually, if it's what we want reported. And we're doing a lot of analysis with our sample. We're using real-time student data and we're comparing it to that alpha report card so we can make sure that our calculations and the way that we were reporting out on the CBE report card matches what mastery, what exemplary, what's still not there yet. We want to make sure that if we're reporting out for a 4 on a CBE report card, for all intents and purposes, that matches what an A would look like on our traditional report card. So we want to get our house in order there too, because what we do not want to be doing is we don't want to provide confusion to parents and we don't want to be experimenting on kids. So we're kind of doing that behind the scenes experimentation right now. So when it is determined that we are ready to roll out a CBE report card, we can honestly stand in front of parents and say, yes, this does work. And here's all the data behind us that shows that, well, you may not be used to seeing the data presented in this fashion. It is just the same data. It's just a lot more robust now because in a CBE report card, a parent would not only see a competencies grade, but they could see how my student is doing on each performance standard as they progress. So we are very excited about that work. And when we can present to you, this is what we've come up with. I am confident that we're going to present a pretty strong product. So that is the presentation. Can I answer any questions?
Sue, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. Who decided on Link Spring? I tried to find out more information about that as I was preparing for the meeting earlier this week, and I couldn't really find any information on how you made that selection.
So Link, L-I-N-C, is a company that the county, that the district partnered with, was about 3 or 4 years ago, Dr. Cobbett, on the push towards blended model. And that was something that was used throughout the district. The district determined at Frederick High School, we're going to give them a little bit extra because we can see how when they're about to start the CBE, blended works very nicely. So we worked with our friends at Link for about 2 or 3 years. We had a consultant on board with us last year, and it's been about a 2-year process that as our transformation team has got stronger, we've been able to pull back from Link because we don't really need the services that they did have to offer. So this year we're not partnering with Link for any consulting fees, but we did like this Link Spring platform that they had to offer. We still saw value in it. So we paid for site licenses for all of our teachers to access Link Spring, and that's why we just used that. It was a product that we had a good partnership with the Link people. But as we got more familiar with Link, we said, hey, we can do this on our own with Schoology. So that's why next year we'll be using Schoology and we won't be using the Link Spring.
And what was the licensing cost for that? Do you know what you're paying?
It was about it was about $10,000. And that came out of our links funding that wasn't from FCPS.
Okay.
I had a
So-
question tied to that. If you answered it before, I apologize. The curriculum you got from MSDE that was approved for credits, when you transfer away from LinkSpring, you're making your own on Schoology. Is that curriculum are you using the same certified curriculums? Will you still be able to get credits for what you're using, or no?
So when you say talking about,
you mentioned that your PD your teachers could get MSDE credit towards their certification, which is wonderful, by the way. But when you change your platforms, are you still moving the same curriculum that was certified by MSDE?
Right. So I am not 100% familiar with the process when we do our own house. Maybe Dr. Cuppet, you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Mr. J. So the LinkSpring content was approved through MSDE. Once we move that to our internal system, obviously we can't use the exact content that LinkSpring has for obvious copyright and intellectual property reasons. So whatever David and the team lay out as the professional learning, we have an internal process. We will work with the folks in Department of Organizational Development, and we can submit that application to MSDE for credit approval. We do that on a very regular basis, and I wouldn't foresee any issues with moving to that internal process based on my knowledge of having that department, MSDE department, under my responsibility for about the last 6 years. This is easy for us to do, and I wouldn't expect any kind of resistance from MSDE. So we'll still be able to provide that opportunity for students.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Sue, did you have another question? Right. I was just thinking of Nancy Grasmick, former state superintendent, who was very integral with the getting links started. And so I would well imagine, I mean, the MSDE building is called the Nancy S. Grasmick building, correct? And I have just sent, Sue and Mr. J, I have just sent you a copy of the letter that I was asked to send to Secretary David Brinkley, formerly my state senator, who I actually do have a good relationship with, which is nice. But he's been very, again, open. He asked, just send me a letter. So I couldn't remember the exact amount. We asked for $236,599, which has been put in the budget before, and that was sent November 6th so that it could get into their budget thinking. So that's where that specific money for links comes from, just as background to our new board members. So I have a few questions. Let's see. Just a comment, actually, that I do love the idea of teacher choice on professional development. I think that's always a winner, and I love to hear that. It was a year or so ago that you all came and presented, I think, in conference room 5A, if I remember correctly. And one of the, I always think of teachers is that, but I like the way you're seeming to let teachers come on. I mean, there's this expectation, but you're letting them kind of absorb it and take their time, but that the teacher workload was extra on this. Now, and we talked about, as an elementary teacher, this was not that unfamiliar a way of doing things for me, but for high school teachers, it was very different. So how are you finding the workload issue with teachers?
So the best way that I can describe the workload, I'm sorry, there's an echo. I hope you guys aren't hearing me.
You might have to mute. There you go.
The best way that I can describe workload is it's very similar to the workload of a first-year teacher. You know, I have always taught AS2, but I've not necessarily taught AS2 this way before. So I have to go back to sort of, okay, I've always given this lesson, but I can't necessarily give this lesson anymore. And the interesting thing, teachers are looking at if our performance standards are based in the FCPS curriculum, if you can't teach a lesson anymore because it's not based in the performance standard that is based in the FCPS curriculum, sometimes that can be a little bit of an ouchie, because what have I been doing? And the conversations I've been having with teachers is just because you're finding that you have to restructure some of the way you've been teaching, that does not mean you're a bad teacher at all. It just means, just like in any other profession, anything else, sometimes we need to stop and refocus. The way that we taught, I mean, our students are constantly changing, especially now our students are constantly changing. We're always looking at different ways of grabbing the student's attention. But how often do we look at the curriculum? Sometimes those curriculum changes, they can come fast and quick, and we don't always see them. If our performance standards are based in the latest curriculum, then yes, opening up the rubric first to be sure, is this exactly what I'm doing? Does it relate to this standard? That's a healthy thing. One thing that we have seen in some teachers, they're saying that, you know what, I saw a huge, well, huge is a little bit of an exaggeration, but I'm not seeing it this year though, with, let's put aside everything moving to online because everybody's feeling that. But the idea of teaching the lesson in CBE, it's not as heavy of a lift as it used to be because now I have some resources that I can pull back on. And one thing we're getting pretty good on here is the idea of sharing the resources. So, and that's where ALP has been a wonderful experience to help. So David, if Mr. Franceschina in this room teaching biology, hey, I have something that works, I can take it back to my ALP bio group, and Miss Yoho says, oh, that did work, let me pull that too. So the idea of sharing it. So I would, to sum up, I think the workload is mostly seen in the teachers coming on board the first time, and I've never taught this lesson in CBE, and I have to rethink of how I can do it, and I have to look at some exercises and activities that I've used, and I may not be able to use it again. Or, you know, I've always taught this portion of World War II. It's not in the curriculum, but I feel that as a teacher, this is important. Those lessons are still important, and we don't want to get away from that. But it's finding out, when can I actually put that into the curriculum? I need to cover the required stuff first and then see where the freedom is. One thing Dr. Marco always says that I appreciate is the idea of freedom within the fences. So we want to be sure that we build those fences not so enclosed in that the teachers don't have anywhere to move, but we give them fences where they can be independent, but we're still checking off all the boxes we have to for our friends at MSDE. Because at the end of the day, our students are getting a diploma from Frederick County Public Schools. We want to be sure that when they leave us, they are covered everything that is in every other school, whether we're CBE or not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so what do you say to parents who, we know I taught elementary math long ago, but this wasn't how I learned it. What do you mean they get to retake something? How's that going to set them up for real life? I'm sure you've heard that. I've heard it. So what do you say to parents?
So one thing that we do have in our reassessment policy, there is a statement underneath there. If you believe strongly that that this isn't the real world and I don't want my kid reassessing, a parent can opt out of reassessment. That statement has been in our reassessment policy for about 2 years now, and I don't want to lie to you, but I am fairly certain no parent has taken us up on that. That was, we had a parent meeting, I think it was I'm sorry, everything before COVID is just closed in on one. So I don't quite remember when it was. It might have been 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago. But we did, when we started to unroll this to parents, that was a concern that, this doesn't prepare my kid for the real world. My response to that is, how many tests? There are millions of tests in the real world that you get reassessment on. You take a driver's test over again, you fail it, that's it, you walk. No, you get to reassess on it. All the way up to a bar exam. I have a friend that just earned his Juris Doctorate and is taking the bar exam, and it took him 2 times to get through. Many colleges now, some colleges do allow for reassessment, others don't. Even the AP test, you can reassess on the AP test. You have to pay for it again, but you can reassess on the AP test. So there are very few tests out there that are purely, you can't reassess. But I do appreciate, if a parent says, nope, it's not how I learned and that's not for my kid. Absolutely. If you don't want your student reassessing, a parent can opt out of reassessment. But what we do want to do is work with parents to show them that, give them the background of our philosophy. When we say that, 90%, we don't get a whole lot of pushback on the 90% for summatives, as long as there's enough summatives in there. While we're preparing kids for college, we are not college, so I don't want 50% of a kid's grade to be one test and the other 50% another. So that's one thing when we work about course development, is making sure that there is enough summative in there, but still the formatives outweigh the summative. So when a parent sees that, ooh, you know, my student's grade is based on these 10 grades, yeah, we do want them to get a little bit of an extra shot at it. And when we talk through it to say that, you know, testing really shouldn't be a one and done. Everybody makes mistakes, and if you don't get it the first time, we want to provide an opportunity to get it again. And frankly, if the student understands it, why would we want to penalize them with a lower grade? If they're going to leave Frederick High School understanding addition, it may have taken them a little bit longer to understand addition, but if we say getting an A in addition means I have left these walls understanding addition, then however long it took you, congratulations, you understand addition. Now it's time to move forward. And to my math friends, I apologize because I'm watering down math a whole lot when I say addition, but we teach calculus here, I promise.
Thank you. That sounds, and that's, I didn't realize you had the opt-out for reassessment, but as you say, if parents aren't taking them, and when you think of how many parents put their children in prep classes for SATs and all, I think bottom line, they do when it applies to them. Just a couple more questions. So you're talking about having this report card, which I appreciate that you're moving through that slowly. How is that going to translate to college? How are colleges going to accept that? And maybe along with that, my last question is, where else is this being done that you're kind of modeling or looking at best practices?
So again, in the before times, before COVID, one of the last things I got to do was I went to a CBE conference that was held up in Boston. This idea of a standards-based report card, a CBE report card, is not new. It's done a lot in the Northwest. It's done a lot on the West Coast, and colleges are used to it. One of the things that one of my favorite sessions that I went to was we went into a room and there were all these college registrars there. And since it's the Northwest, there were several Ivy Leagues there. I mean, Harvard was one I remember because how often do you get to talk to the registrar at Harvard? And they were saying that they have become very familiar with a standards-based report card or a CBE report card. Whenever we send a student's transcript to a college, there's also a school profile in there that spells out that we are a CBE school. This is what it means. Right now, when we send out the school report card, it says, you know, this is what the ALP looks like. And so registrars can interpret that, what it means. Crazily enough, for what one registrar said, they actually appreciate the CBE report card more because it's more information on the students. So they see that, okay, you know, David got an A in Algebra 2. Well, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses that relate to that? So on a standards or CBE report card, they're going to see the A, whether it's an A or a 4 remains to be seen. That's the work we're going to do right now. But they'll also see the relation to those standards underneath. So it's more information for the colleges. But the short answer to your question is it actually gives the colleges a little bit more information when they're selecting students, and colleges are used to it.
Very good. Thank you. I see, thanks for answering all my questions. I see I've gone a little over probably the time we had allotted, but I appreciate that. And we got a lesson in pronouncing Mr. Franceschina's name as the Italian pronunciation. My family will tell you all about how I am with that. And yes, everything is pre-COVID, and that will be the way we go forward. Oh, pre-COVID, yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. I turn it back to Dr. Cuppett.
Thank you, guys. You guys have a great day. So I think I'll be able to successfully share now. I actually had to work out of a different browser today, so I'm going to see if this works. Actually, I have a permission error. Let me see if I can do the whole screen. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to pull this one up just yet. Dwayne, by chance, are you given permission yet? Because I'm still having difficulty.
I'll try again, Dr. Cuppert. It does not appear on the Chromebook in the Google Slides for some reason. I will try again.
All right.
Dr. Cuppett, it seems as if I can present. Now, I don't have the actual presentation, but I can do it from the board docs if you want me to go ahead and do it on your behalf.
Ms. Bingman, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much.
So this will be the PDF version. So Ms. Bingman will just have to scroll through. So Dwayne, just let her know when you want to go to the next slide. And I'll reintroduce Dwayne Cash. He's our curriculum specialist for world languages. He's going to give us an update on our programming grades 6 through 12. So I'll turn it over to Dwayne. Thank you, Dwayne, for your patience.
So Let me start over by saying good morning, members of the board, Dr. Cuppet, Dr. Harris, Dr. Marco. Thank you for the opportunity and your patience with us as we work through the age of technology. So the beginning screen, date, my name and who I am. The strategic goal for slide 1 talks about equipping students in terms to be engaged citizens, which is directly aligned to our national standards from the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages in the instruction that we do to help students not only understand what is happening in this country, but locally and globally as well. Okay, next slide. I'm going to speak more specifically to some things that we're doing to raise the achievement in our course offerings. And as you are aware, there are 2 requirements that are necessary for the high school diploma, and we start as early as the 6th grade. Our current world language course offerings, we have expanded American Sign Language. We now offer up to level 4. That's happening in 4 schools. We have a course that we're currently writing that we will bring to your concern for approval at some point in the future, which will be in advanced studies, as the College Board does not offer an AP for American Sign Language, French, and this is a combination of middle schools and high schools, 7 schools. German is at the sole location of TJ High School, now Latin in 5 schools. That program has decreased significantly due to a number of retirements, and at some point we had the highest Latin enrollment in the state of Maryland, and I think we're either 2nd or 3rd now. Spanish in 10 schools, and we now have, actually that's an error, Spanish for bilingual speakers is happening in 2 schools now, Monocacy Middle as well as Tuscarora High School, and that's a course for heritage speakers. The middle schools, those offerings are listed there in addition to the World Language Exploratory, which may be taken one time in either 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, which is an exploration of all the different languages. Our benchmarks, which typically happen in levels 1 and 2, there are 4 of those throughout the year, levels 1 and 2 of all of the languages, and those have been suspended in the virtual platform, as those are traditional paper and pencil tests that are local assessments. I've had numerous meetings with the high school department chairs and select high school teachers now in the virtual format. And some of those have been teachers from various buildings. As one of the things that Dr. Cuppet has frequently mentioned in our meetings, one of the positives of the virtual environment is now that we are able to have teachers from various schools to be able to collaborate. And some of them have even begun to visit other teachers' classes in real time, which is something that typically would not have happened before. A teacher at Middletown probably would have never had the opportunity to see someone at Urbana High teach. And so that's been happening now. And teachers have been doing that on their own at my encouragement. And so that's been a really good thing. A more formalized process is that every Thursday morning, the middle school teachers and I meet to go through an ALP process. This was started by some middle school principals. And so we are discussing every Thursday the lessons, the progress of students, behavioral objectives, different kinds of technology, best ways to reach students. The most pressing topic now is to try to find incentives for students to actually turn on their cameras and come out of the chat and actually converse with their teachers in real time, as opposed to just chatting, their responses. So that continues to happen every Thursday and is a very good conversation. Despite the changes that College Board made in the AP tests, we still had a record number of students that applied for and received the seal of biliteracy. This is an honor that's happening nationwide now. The state of Maryland was one of the last to come on board, but it is an honor for students that is now noted on their high school transcript that they can take with them to college after they have gotten a successful score on the Maryland High School Assessment for the English, as well as having earned a score either on AP tests, IB tests, or some other state-approved tests in a given language. We had 31 students in Spanish, 11 of those which were heritage speakers, meaning Spanish was their first language, 2 in German, 1 was a heritage speaker, 5 in French, and 3 were heritage speakers. We had 2 students in Latin and 1 student in Russian. And let me just note here that we do not offer Russian, but a student can come to us and say, I would like to apply for the seal of biliteracy in any given language that he may have had experience with, either through travel, through his parents, heritage speaker. And if that person meets the required score, then we can award the seal of biliteracy for that student as well. The LEAP partnership is still in place, the Language Education Advancement Project. This happened when we were still face-to-face via persons that would come to us from the National Security Agency or other governmental agencies that came to speak to various classes about what it means to be an interpreter, what it means to be a translator for the federal government, or what it means to work in some capacity. That partnership is still happening now as the NSA has made persons available to be guest speakers in teachers' classes virtually. Has not happened to the extent that it happened face-to-face because teachers are just very concerned about learning loss and having too many guest speakers because they want to focus on their instructional games. I mentioned the last time that I spoke to the board that I was asked to chair the state's and the nation's first polyglot games, which is going to happen at some point, possibly virtually. The committee and I will reconvene about that at some point in the spring. And this is mirrored after a competition that takes place at NSA, where military officials who speak various languages come together and compete basically in games. It's just a day of fun in games in various languages, and medals are awarded to the persons that win. And so we will be having that hopefully face-to-face once we return. And let me just put in my budgetary plug here. I think Dr. Cuppet will appreciate. So we will need some funds for students to convene to get together for competitions. I think other than the fact that we are working, as you are probably aware, on the one last thing I'll mention is the Black African American Heritage Resources, which we are putting some finishing touches on. And the spin that I put on that for world languages is that, for example, in our German classes, they will be looking at the Afro-German experience. In Spanish classes, we'll be talking about Afro-Chileans, Afro-Peruvians, those kinds of things. ASL students will be taking a look at the regional dialect of Black ASL. And so those things will be happening in the month of February once those have been finalized and released. And I think I'm at the end now, and so I will pause here for your questions or comments.
Jason, do you have any questions for Mr. Cash?
I do have questions. I wanted to ask, hi, Mr. Cash, how are you? Actually, I can say good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
I know we've met briefly in the past. I was working with the STEM Chinese language program, and I ran into you at a conference. I forget where we were. I think it was in Atlanta. But hi again. Okay. I wanted to ask you about the Latin course. I can tell you that I've sent a lot of students your way in the Latin course. It's teaching science. I told my kids, like, Latin is a powerful language. Go learn it. A lot of them told me they went and took Latin, so I'm glad to hear that we were doing well with that. With the possible retirements coming up with the teachers there, I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on making that a virtual course and have those teachers, like, now as we have now, having them write a virtual course if that's not already being done, so that, if we do see a wide amount of layoffs or not layoffs, retirements or whatever, and they leave us, just to go retire and enjoy their life, I get that, but then we lose the ability to have that Latin base. Is the language that would actually lend itself to doing well in a virtual space, like for a virtual school course?
Given that there's not a speaking component to it, it could be very well done in the virtual environment. That's a conversation we'd have to have with our colleagues who take care of the virtual platform. I'm not aware of the cost of that program or how much space or time would be allotted to that in the high school program. But I do want to share with you, Mr. J, part of the reason for that is just that there is just the number of persons that are graduating in the classics are Latin are so very few. We had one person who, interestingly, is an FCPS graduate that recently did a long-term sub for us for our Latin teacher at Tuscarora High, Matthew O'Keefe, a phenomenal scholar. I attempted to set up an interview with him as recently as this week, and he told me that he had taken a job doing something else that was much more lucrative in Colorado. And at that time, when he graduated about 2 years ago, he was the only person in the entire department at UMBC that graduated with the classics degree.
Wow.
But to get back to your point, in terms of the virtual environment, yes, that's definitely something that we will begin to look into. So thank you for that recommendation.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you. Now, I wanted to say congratulations on the Literacy Seal students you had in that program. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sue, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know what determines the distribution of language offerings at the various schools. Like, where is French offered, and what helps drive that decision making? Is it based on school size or population?
Traditionally, it's based on availability of personnel, scheduling. So, for example, Frederick High has a teacher, a French teacher, Suzanne Bensing, who has traditionally had to teach French and Spanish because the numbers or the requests for enrollment for French are not sufficient to dictate the full-time position. When Dragana Blunder was at Ligonier High School, she taught all French in one class. So those decisions are typically made at the school level in terms of language offerings, which are generally driven by the student requests. So where there's a huge request, it's been my experience that principals would typically try to say, hey, I'm having X amount of students that are wanting French or X amount of students that are wanting German. Are you able to find me a teacher? And then we go to availability of personnel. And if we are unable to find a teacher, or at least have a teacher that we can share among schools, then those students are typically driven to a different language.
Okay. And okay, that's interesting. So it's based on teachers more than students. And is that survey formal, or is it anecdotal?
Can you ask me the question one more time, please, Ms. Johnson?
Yes. Is the surveying to determine the need, is it anecdotal or is it a formal survey? Do we have data, raw data or hard data that we can use to determine what the needs will be?
The schools have a student request form each year wherein students are allowed to choose the courses that they want. The process of determining if Dr. Francisquina were, for example, to have X amount of students that request German, in terms of what he and his admin team, whether or not that comes to me to say, can we find a German teacher or not, I'm generally not involved in that process because those are school-based decisions.
And so, Ms. Johnson, each school would have those course tallies. That's what's typically created, number of kids who are interested in certain courses. And then principals do have to weigh their current staffing allocation to figure out if they can actually run so many sections of each course that they have. So it's a combination of teacher availability. In world language, it is truly a combination of teacher availability as well as student interest.
Okay. And on the Russian language, that is just, we have no formal Russian classes in the public school.
No, ma'am. We've not had any Russian. The closest that we've come to that is that we had a history teacher who I think is no longer in the system at Oakdale High School. Her name escapes me now. That did Russian for us 2 or 3 summers in the exploratory camps that we normally have for the elementary students. And of course, we didn't have this summer because of the pandemic. But that's been the closest that we've come to Russian, and she's run that for us. I think it was probably 3 years.
Okay, I have just found that that's a common language, that you would see in the portfolio of language offerings. And I just wanted to ask about that. And then he talked about exploratory camps for younger students. What do we offer for our youngest learners in terms of world language exposure?
At the elementary level, there are no formalized day programs, and thus I was offering the summer camps. Maybe 4 to 5 years ago, there were schools, select schools, that elementary principals contacted me and wanted to offer something, but those were paid experiences after school, somewhat like an after school club that say 20 to 25 parents participated in. And that was just purely driven by the principal saying, I'd like to offer an ASL experience after school, or a Spanish experience, or a French experience. And so we had secondary teachers who ran those. But again, I want to be clear, that was not made available to the population at large. That was just for those parents who paid for those experiences. And the other ones have been the summer experiences that I've mentioned that we've had, which has been one exploratory camp, and the other has been a Spanish immersion camp along with some Latin experience.
Okay. And then do you have any overlap or reach into, I guess, is the Frederick Classical Charter School? Which one, doesn't one of our schools do Latin? Or is it just a Latin-based approach? I feel like I've seen something somewhere along the lines. You have to help.
Yes, ma'am. There are some offerings of Latin at the Frederick Classical Charter School. The charter was originally intended for every student in the school, yes, to have some exposure to Latin. And so that increases as students become older. So I don't have their exact schedule in front of me, but just say, for example, in 2nd or 3rd grade, those students would maybe get 30 minutes of Latin twice a week. And then as they get older, that Latin increases.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any oversight of that?
I work with the administration there in terms of working with those teachers. I observe those teachers, yes, and those teachers participate in our professional learning, yes.
I'm trying to understand like how the relationships work between the charter schools. Thank you very much. That was all my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Very good. Yes, some of my questions were answered. I was going to ask about what the summer program, obviously it wasn't held last year. Any thoughts that it might be able to be held this year, or waiting to see?
Certainly, Ms. Yoho, that would be my intention. Before when we got out of school in March and Dr. Cuppett asked me what were my thoughts, I canceled the camps long before the numbers got as badly or became as bad as they did. And I want to say, out of an abundance of caution, to have those many children together as we have, and we're talking about hundreds, if the numbers are not safe, I wish to be very clear that that's not something I would be comfortable sponsoring.
And I totally appreciate that. Just to throw it out there, is it possible maybe Ballinger Creek Park, where they have outdoor shelters, roof over, something like that? Just throwing it out there for you to think about, because it was such a wonderful thing. I was very interested in the polyglot games, and congratulations on sharing that. So I looked up what, is the military, the NSAs, and it looks fascinating. So I'd love for you to keep us apprised of how that goes, and if we can sort of see some outcomes of that. But I thought I could do okay on readings. I saw there was one where you had to read and you were assessed by a native speaker on your accent. I thought maybe a little. I read German. I have no idea what I'm saying, but I phonetically can read German and maybe French. So I thought that might be something I could do, but looked fascinating and a really neat thing. That was my original thought, to be a translator at the UN in New York, but that never happened. So, but I love language. So thank you so much. I think that was all that I had.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. Have a great day.
Likewise.
So our third and I believe final presentation is around gifted and talented programming. And Dr. Harris, our Executive Director for Accelerating Achievement and Equity, and Dr. Jessica Reinhard are here to bring you an update. There's been a lot going on in this area, so I'm super interested to hear about this as well. So Dr. Harris?
Okay, all right. Do we have the presentation up? Do you all see that?
Yes, we can, Keith. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning. Again, I'm Keith Harris, the Executive Director of Accelerating Achievement and Equity, under which Advanced Academics is one of the program areas that I have the pleasure of serving. And Dr. Jessica Reinhardt is the supervisor for Advanced Academics. And so we certainly welcome her this morning as well. What we like to do is just to share some of the changes and updates with our gifted and talented program. There's been some significant changes over the past few years, and that's even occurring recently as regarding some of our virtual learning and COVID. And so we just want to be able to provide you with an update in our gifted and talented programming, allowing you some opportunity to understand and learn some of the changes that we have made as a result of 2019 COMAR expectations, and then also share some of the areas that we're still working on and the implications for our programming moving forward. And so Dr. Reinhardt will start off our presentation, and then I'll pick back up a little later.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Harris, and good morning, Curriculum Instruction Committee members. I really am grateful to have the opportunity to share the updates to our program. As you can see, there's been quite a history to COMAR 13A 0407, or COMAR for GT education. We have been required, along with all of the other Maryland districts, to not only analyze our alignment with this mandate, but determine the gaps between current practice and required practices and seek ways to address these gaps. And the main driver for our next steps in not only the field of gifted and talented education, but also in Maryland, is this understanding and application of the equity lens. And it's the same lens that we value in Frederick County Public Schools. So we do apply it to our work across the school system. And it's worth noting that the term equity has been distinctly present throughout all MSDE gifted and talented documents, even since the 1990s. And the philosophy has been part of Maryland's definition of gifted and talented students since actually the 1970s. So this slide and the next slide will highlight the main components of the mandate. The focus here is specifically centered on screening and identification of gifted and talented students at all schools. And again, there's a strong focus on equity, as it should. The takeaway from this slide is that the identification process, all aspects of it, encompass all students. And we are going to be required to use local norms through this identification process. And the main components of this COMAR are continued here. Not only must we provide program updates through our local ESSA consolidated plan, but we also must submit progress toward the alignment with all of this COMAR's indicators every 3 years. It is a very rigorous process. It requires extensive documentation, and Frederick County Public Schools is scheduled for its review during 2021-2022. And we have currently some level of gifted and talented programs and services in place. I'd like to highlight two specifically that involve talent spotting and talent development which is an important part of the gifted and talented identification and service delivery processes. So the first one would be primary talent development. It is actually named as a component of this COMAR for Gifted and Talented Education. It focuses on all students, grades pre-K through 2. Its curriculum varies slightly across the state, but its purpose is the same. We deliver lessons that involve high-level thinking and reasoning, and we begin documenting evidence of advanced learner responses and behaviors from this exposure to primary talent development. The second one just celebrated 10 years of the program, and that's the Young Scholars. That spans grades 2 through 12. It is currently in place for students at Hillcrest Elementary, Monocacy Elementary, Monocacy Middle, West Frederick Middle School, and it continues vertically through Governor T.J. High School and Frederick High School. And it allows us to talent spot and provide talent development to a cohort of students, those students who are traditionally underrepresented and therefore underserved by advanced level programs.
And Dr. Reinhardt, thank you so much. There were so many that were involved in reshaping the program so that we could continue to have the program this past summer. And even though we held it virtually, it was just a wonderful experience, and so many teachers and some of our professionals from different arenas in the community were able to join our students this past summer for it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And additionally, we have the programs outlined here. The HAL program at the middle school level, it did begin to phase in specifically as HAL during the 2012-2013 school year. And we also have some version of a gifted and talented program at some of our elementary schools. That's where you see the school-wide enrichment program. And we have highly able action plans for some students, a few students across the system.
Now, all that Dr. Reinhardt just shared are current aspects of our gifted and talented programming in FCPS. And now she'll talk a little bit about the direct alignment to the expectations in 2019 COMAR for gifted and talented education.
Yes, and so the checked items on this slide, as Dr. Harris shared, show some of the alignments that we presently have for COMAR for gifted and talented education. And it is our compilation of data gathered through the universal screening process that has afforded us the opportunity to operationalize next steps in alignment with the gifted and talented mandate through COMAR. And so we began with the universal screening process. We screen all students in grade 2. And at present, through our last reporting to the state, we had identified just almost 10% throughout the school system. As I mentioned, we do have some programs and services, and we do offer some professional learning, which is limited and mostly focused at the middle school level for our HAL teachers, our highly able learner program teachers. And so while we've made some strides, we do still have some boxes to check, and you can see them here. And by putting in new practices and processes and programs into place, here's where our focus is. We're moving toward equity, and the universal screening process will get us there. We do have to ensure that we are identifying and serving students in every school. and that starts at the elementary school level. We also are looking at not only examining the data that we have so far, but using it to further refine our processes. We see the screening methods continue to be refined, but also ensure full compliance with this COMAR. And this will involve increasing supports to our schools. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harris so he can share some of our additional updates.
Thanks, Dr. Reinhardt. And so in Frederick County, our advanced academics programming has been well in place with many different aspects and programs that we've had in alignment to 2019 COMAR expectations. As Dr. Reinhardt said, there are a few boxes that we're still refining and some things that we're enhancing for our programming, in particular, making sure that we are identifying a significant number of students in each and every school. Currently, the main focus for our entire gifted and talented programming at the elementary level is our magnet program, whereby we have previously formally identified students. Now with changes in COMAR, we've changed the identification process, and through some of our programming, our efforts have been to really significantly identify and support students in each and every school for advanced and gifted level programming. And so there's a lot of work that's been done through our advanced academics office to be able to support these students in our schools. One of the things we recognize is that even though there are students who have applied for the magnet program and some get in, there are some who don't apply, and there are some who apply and just choose not to participate in the program. So there are a lot of students that's occurred. But given some of our efforts and opportunities, we've pretty much doubled over the past few years the number of students who have been applying for our magnet programming. And then with the identification of students, then that's also increased the number of identified gifted and talented students at each and every school. And so with the pandemic, we were put into a good situation, and yet a situation that caused us to really rethink our magnet programming. And because we were not in school since March, our identification processes usually start with communication in January, and then some nomination forms in February, and some real formal testing procedures that occur in March and throughout the year. Well, this past school year, we were not able to do that because of the pandemic. And we tried so many different ways to try to get students identified for the specific magnet program, but we were not able to do that. And so what we ended up doing was suspending the identification program for our magnet program for this current school year. And what has happened is that there's no new students who were formally identified for the magnet program in grade 3 for this year. Now, if you were previously identified and enrolled in the magnet program for grades 4 and 5, you continued in the program. And so our current, we currently have grade 4 and grade 5 magnet programs that are occurring. And so what has happened for our third grade students and those who also were interested in the magnet program, they currently remain in their home schools. And we developed some programming, some professional learning. We work with schools and with teachers to be able not only to let them know who these students are, but then also to assist and support them with grouping processes in order to meet their needs. And then, of course, there was a lot of work that was done with providing some programs and some supports and some resources to meet the needs of these students in their classrooms. Now, those third grade magnet teachers who typically would have had a third grade magnet classroom, they don't this year. So what we've done is really deploy them to be able to work directly with schools, not only to support the students who were formally identified, but then also to support the teachers to be able to meet the needs of these students in their schools. So that actually, so far this year, that has gone extremely well, because not only have we been able to meet the needs of these students and who were nominated for the program, but then also support the needs of students in our various schools who demonstrate advanced needs. And so we've deployed our existing magnet teachers and then some other central office staff to be able to meet the needs in each of these schools. That, with 2019 COMAR, with the programming model that we have to use for our magnet programming for this year, really has pushed us into examining our magnet programming as it is required in alignment to 2019 COMAR requirements for GT education. And so as we're thinking about this, one of the things that we know is that gifted and talented programming must be available in every school within our system. Currently, we just have a regional-based model in 3 schools, and students who are nominated attend those different schools. And when we really think about it, the current model of our magnet program doesn't necessarily fully support our 2019 COMAR expectations for gifted, talented education. And so one of the things that we are assessing now is really thinking about not only evaluating how things are going now, and right now in all of our schools, not only are there third grade students, but there are students in grades 4 and 5, as well as primary students through primary talent development who we're servicing in their schools, but then also if there's additional supports that's needed, we are providing those supports through Central. And so as we think about going forward, the option and really the opportunity that we have for our gifted and talented programming at the elementary level is not only to continue to have third grade magnet programming at each of our schools, but then continue to phase the program such that whereas this year we have grade 4 and grade 5 magnet programming, while we're still supporting grades 3, 4, and 5 in all grades at the elementary level in all of our schools, then next year, if we continue with this model, we would not identify any new students in grades 3 and 4. And then the subsequent year, not identify any new students in grades 3, 4, and 5. What that would allow us to do is to ensure that those students and all other students are identified in their home schools, that they're able to stay in their home schools. But then secondly, continue to support schools in providing for the needs of students who demonstrate gifted and advanced learning capabilities and have the resources and support centrally to be able to support students by way of professional learning for teachers, by way of direct support to students. If students are outliers in their schools, then use that staffing to be able to directly support those students. And so those are some of the things that we are thinking about and considering with our gifted and talented programming at the elementary level. And as we started this presentation, one of the things that Dr. Reinhardt said, and really is what is outlined in COMAR, is the fact that there is an expectation that we have identified students in each and every school, and that we're supporting and programming for students in each and every school. And this really is in alignment with our aspirational board goal that really talks about each and every student will have the opportunity to high quality advanced programming to be able to tap into their creative thinking, their problem solving abilities, their opportunities for collaboration, and to be able to raise the level of achievement for all students. And just because you're not identified for a magnet program doesn't mean that we should not be able to program and support you within your home school. And as a matter of fact, a few years ago, we actually surveyed parents. And one of the things that we hear over and over again is that while they enjoy and would like advanced programming, they want it in their home school. They don't want to leave their home school and travel to another school, because that creates some other dynamics and issues for them. Our board policy with equity and excellence also supports and calls for not only 2019 COMAR for GTE, but some of the efforts that we've been doing and some of the direction that we're headed into for our advanced academics programming. You know, our board policy states and our efforts have been to eliminate disproportionality with students, not just who need remediation, but students who need advanced and gifted programming as well. And that's been a clear focus of our Department for Advanced Academics. And I'll just end it with this. There are a lot of great things that our Advanced Academics office and our schools have been doing. As you've seen at the beginning of this programming, there is a lot of things happening for programming for advanced academics and gifted and talented. And now we need to continue to make sure that we are accelerating our efforts so that no longer is equity an aspirational idea, but we make some steps, some aims, and take some actions to actually achieve it for each and every student. So I just wanted to end it there, and I'll turn it over for questions.
And before I turn it over to my colleagues for questions, I just want to say that, wow, one bright spot of COVID is that kind of forced the issue of getting to where so many people have felt we needed to get. This was being discussed when I came on the board by other board members who are no longer on the board. So, and having been on the other side of it as a teacher, you know, at Tuscarora, I had 1 year, 2 second graders were the only students in the school who qualified to go to magnet. But as you said, their parents decided, no, we don't want that. We just wanted to know. We didn't want to send them. We think the school can provide for them. And they didn't want different schedules, their children going farther. And so that is a big piece of equity, is bringing it to the children. Same school, fast forward, I was math intervention. I had a kindergartner. I was on a highly able plan for a kindergartner. What fun that was, working with a group of kindergartners who loved math. It was just great. So, you know, you start to see these ways you get creative, get a little maybe forced to by legislation or rules and situation. And very glad to hear that this is the future, that we're bringing it to the students instead of making the students come to it. Very nice. Now I open it for questions. Sue, any questions? Mute. Oh,
I got it. I was just wondering, in terms of where we're falling short, is there a actual plan for when the goals will be achieved? So I see, like, where we're not meeting expectations of COMAR, but is there like a timeline for, we'll achieve? And I was trying to pull up the presentation on my screen so I could just like look at each item again. But I mean, it's one thing to have it. Well, we're falling short in these areas. Do we have for me personally, to know we're going to address this and we're going to make progress by this date? So I don't know if anyone can address that.
And so the good thing is, where there are areas that we're looking at making sure we're in full alignment, those are areas that we've been focused on already. And so there are some efforts. So with our universal screening process, that's done. We have a universal screening process that's already in place that forces our equity identification processes. And we worked, was it last year, Ms. Bingman, or the year before, on making sure that we have students properly identified and tagged in our student system for each and every school, so that schools have a process whereby they are very clearly identifying students for gifted and talented. That's a process that we've had in place, and that's already in place right now. Professional learning.
I apologize for interrupting. That was going to be one of my big questions. Since you're talking about it, could you describe the universal screening process, please?
Yes, and so I'll turn it over to you, and then Ms. Bingman, because this is not just one department's efforts and work. Our SASSA department, Ms. Bingman, has been significant as part of this work as well. So you can go ahead and chime in as well.
Great, thank you, Dr. Harris. So we began the universal screening process. We have currently screened all grades 3 and 4 students. And the universal screener that we use is the COGAT, or Cognitive Abilities Test. We, in addition to that, use norm-referenced performance data, such as the performance series. And we also use a gifted behavior potential. It's an inventory of behaviors. So that is part of the universal screening process. And as I said, currently, all of our grades 3 and 4 students who took the assessment have been reviewed. We tagged those students as of this year. And we do have plans to screen our grade 2 students by the end of this year. So where that puts us, when we have to consider a significant number of students identified in each of our elementary schools, and as we phase it in, that will be the case at middle and high. Currently, we have about 25% of our grade 3 students identified. That's as of this year, because we have to continue to use the data, continue to screen, continue to identify. And for grade 4, we have almost 17%. So that, if we just combine those grades, those 2 grades, we're about at 21%. And again, we're looking for outliers in every single school. So we will have more outliers in some schools than in others, but our goal is to get to at least 5% at every school. So we've been phasing it in, we've been tagging these students, and we've been communicating the names of these students to our elementary schools. That process significantly progressed this year. and it's surprising, but it was one of the things that that COVID allowed us to do, was spend more time on the identification and tagging, as well as develop resources that could be used within these schools for these identified students. And
when we think about our identification processes, we know that not all students demonstrate giftedness in the same way. We used to have a process that was strictly based on their academic achievement. Our universal screening processes not only takes into consideration their academic achievement, but also learner dispositions that are typical of gifted students. And so it may be that there's a student in your classroom who seems inattentive and seems very curious. That's a student we need to pay attention to, because maybe it's just that we're not reaching them in the way that they need to be reached individually as a gifted learner. And so our instruction needs to change to meet the needs of that student. Ms. Bingman, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else before we have some other questions.
I mean, I'll just layer on quickly just to say that we do have data reporting tools that allow schools to really unpack the triangulation of data that they just described, because it is really the powerful look at all three data points that really help to identify students. And when you separate those out, that is when you necessarily are kind of separating kids out of being identified. And so it's really important that the tools that we provide to schools allow them to look at all three pieces together and really unpack for the school how they can support the student appropriately based on the data. And we have been able to find students who kind of excelled in one of those areas and maybe not in other areas and may have been overlooked previously. And we were able to utilize those as a learning tool to help schools to say, hey, these are the types of students that our previous model of identification overlooked. And here's how we need to dig deeper into it. And as well, really utilizing the learning profiles that are provided based on the triangulation of data to really help schools to identify how to support them. So it really has been a robust kind of reporting system that has really helped to have schools have that information at their fingertips to be able to utilize to make sure that they have what they need to identify and appropriately support students.
And another benefit of utilizing all of the data is that it allows us to identify and serve within the school students who do not demonstrate giftedness across all subject areas. That is something that is different from the magnet program. So what we would like to be able to do through this process is, if a student demonstrates giftedness verbally, that they are not excluded from services because they do not demonstrate giftedness in the verbal domain as well as the quantitative domain or in math. So it does allow us to identify more diverse students. And what we know from our research is that even among students from different backgrounds, giftedness presents itself differently. And we have to continue to talent spot and talent develop the innate potential within these students.
Thank you so much. I apologize for interrupting, Sue, but I thought that was a good place to interject that. Go ahead.
Well, in terms of just any other questions I had, it's just, again, the emphasis on making sure we have equity and that our students have opportunity that will, whatever it takes. And if there's anything I can do personally to help support that in any regard, let me know.
Thank you.
Mr. J, questions?
Oh, yes, thank you. So this is a lot here for me. So being a student who was identified as a child and having different experiences as a parent and educator, actually I worked in the HAL department as one of the first specialists in the department a lot here. First, I want to commend you on what you're doing now, because we know from our numbers, looking at our students taking AP classes in high school, The numbers are well higher than we have kids identified for elementary. So we know we missed some kids. And so I'm very pleased that we're taking steps to go broaden our approach and gather those students. I really have I'm not sure if you tell me if Comar is getting here, but I really see that teaching students or get their students really has to be focused on, like we do education. Those kids need services, and our kids who are getting talented need services. I've seen it in the best of ways and in the worst of ways. I taught at Heather Ridge for a time. I had a student who was there, a juvenile student, had some concerns. But the thing about that student was, I say this, he was a genius. He just applied himself in the most devious ways. The kid was swift. I begin a lesson, he'd already be at the end of it. But he was and I thought he had been identified earlier and redirected, he wouldn't be putting his evil genius to work. He'd be able to apply the way. So I'm so glad we're broadening the approach to get to our students. I wanted to ask, what are we doing and how are we making sure that we eliminate bias? And here I'm gonna give you an example. Unfortunately, this is a personal story. I have a student, and my child was taught multiplication at an early age. Mother is a math genius. Her brain is more math than mine. And so he came in second grade knowing how to multiply and do a lot of math. During that year, he was brought to our attention that he was remedial. And he needed to be taken for extra services. We're like, this is the same kid, huh? He was really confused. So we thought it might have been an issue of expectancy. We asked for another classroom. He was moved to the other classroom. The next year, he went right to magnet program. The only thing that changed was what was expected of him, and which is sad because I literally walked through that. I knew the kind of kid I had as an educator. I knew I wasn't, but only change was what was expected of him. So, what are we doing to eliminate bias? Is it bias proof? What are we doing in that realm?
So you bring up some excellent thoughts and some questions. First, let me touch on students with disabilities, because an emphasis of ours is to focus on twice exceptionality. And we recognize that there are students with disabilities who also are gifted. And so the Advanced Academics Office has been working with our Special Education Office on efforts for twice exceptionality and to make sure that we are also identifying students who are gifted, but also have the tag of students with disabilities. And then to talk about the whole bias issue, well, that's where our universal screening processes come into play, because there's a greater chance of bias when we only look at academic outcomes and ignore every other aspect of a student and their profile. But when we not only look at academic outcomes, but when we also look at ability measures that is not dependent upon your ability for reading, writing, and math, and when we look at our gifted learner behaviors, and when we do professional learning with that, one of the things that staff discovers is that the student who you thought may have been a student with behavioral issues actually is a student screaming for advanced programming. And so we help schools to realize those things. And so the first part of the answer with the bias is our universal screening process helps to mitigate against that. Secondly, what it does is take the identification solely out of the school's hands. Now, our schools have a process, an accelerated learning process, whereby it is not just an individual teacher who is saying this student is advanced or this student is not advanced. There's a team at each and every school that looks at the profile of students to say, we think we need to do something differently with this student. Thirdly, on top of that, as Ms. Bingman said, we monitor the performance of our students centrally. And we go to schools and say, as a matter of fact, when I began the presentation, one of the things I said is, we said to schools, here are the students that we need to plan for and group differently. And we give that list of students to schools and work with the schools to help them with cluster grouping and using resources and supports to meet the advanced needs. And in some cases, as Dr. Reinhardt alluded to, schools, when we meet with them and review data, are shocked that this student comes up with a profile of one who has gifted and advanced abilities. And so then we have conversations about those things. And so those are all ways that we're trying to mitigate against bias for the identification. So excellent questions and thoughts along those lines. Thank you.
And I just had a couple more. I wanted this opportunity. I wanted to ask about where we're going next. So I know we're looking at, so is it going to be more of a pull-out program going forward, or is it going to be immersion? I can speak to seeing the benefits of it at home. The immersion was really good, and I want to give a special thanks to Mr. Bowser over at Newmarket Elementary, Mrs. King, Mrs. Tell King, and Mrs. Woosley for their work, and because it was just really good to see that they kind of came around the students, and is there a way we can do that at schools? Because like I was a student who was gifted, I was kind of like pulled back and forth. So like you would have spots of academic support. Is there a way we can kind of surround them? I know at West Frederick Middle School, they're doing that with their HOW programs, or we can surround our students.
And so, Mr. J, that is the express intent of our gifted and talented programming, so that we can meet the needs of students in their regular classroom environment, and through grouping practices and through working with the teacher and providing resources and supports, meeting the needs of students in that environment. And so the idea is not to provide gifted programming by pulling students out and giving them something that's overtly different than other students. One of the other benefits of the immersive model for our gifted and talented programming is that even if in that classroom a student is not formally identified as a student as gifted and talented, but yet as we're teaching a specific skill and that student demonstrates advanced skills, we want to be able to capture that student as well. And so, yeah, it is so important that we not create a model whereby we don't build up the classroom teacher to be able to meet the needs of the student, and whereby there is rescue personnel that's going to come in and meet the needs of students who are different in your classroom. We're going to build you up to be able to meet those student needs. Now, we also recognize that there are students who are such outliers that we do need to provide something significantly different for. And we'd be able to use our central staffing to work with that student directly or work with the school in meeting the needs of that student.
One more question. When you're doing identification, are there, throughout the year, are there more than one opportunity for identification? Is it ongoing, or are they like?
And so, Ms. Bingman, I'll let you chime in here because I know you'll glow, because that's the one thing with, as a matter of fact, when we think about our magnet programming, there is a time period in the year before that we identify students. Now with our model, we're identifying throughout the year. Talk about it, Ms. Bingman.
Yeah, we certainly have all kinds of assessments that teachers are constantly reviewing and looking at and making sure that they're identifying students and meeting their needs appropriately. And like Dr. Harris shared, they have accelerated learning process meetings on an ongoing basis where they're looking at individual standards, how students are performing on individual standards, and how they can make sure that they're accelerating learning for that student each and every lesson, like on an ongoing basis. So it's the accelerated learning process, and actually that's on the agenda for next month. So I and Kelly Denty will be here next month that will be presenting on accelerated learning process. And we'll be talking about how data and evidence of learning is such an important piece of those meetings, and then making sure that we are appropriately identifying students, responding to student needs, and making sure that we're monitoring how they're doing with each and every standard. So we'll share that next month. And absolutely, we are never a one and done type of look. It's always an ongoing effort to identify and meet students' needs.
Thank you.
I know we're coming up close to the time, but I think this is a quick question. The teachers that are currently magnet, I saw that the third grade teachers, I was looking at the different schools. One seems to be an itinerant, maybe from Newmarket, was that, or maybe Urbana. Anyway, so the current magnet teachers, as the magnet school programs are phased out, what will happen with those teachers, I guess, is my question.
And so those positions will be used to be, as you said, in an itinerant format, to be able to support schools and then also directly support, if necessary, students or the implementation of highly able learning plans in our schools.
And will the teachers currently doing that, they'll be given the option of if that's what they want to do, as opposed to going back in the classroom, or they'll automatically get those positions, or how's that going to be done?
And so this year, because of the timing, they didn't have a choice. We do want to work with human resources to be able to give them a choice on what's best for them, because there are some teachers who want to stay in the classroom. And so we want to give them that opportunity. And then there are some teachers who are successful at a school-based level, but not necessarily from a system-wide central level. And so we'll work with human resources on those processes.
Very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. I think we have just agenda items for next time, right? So as Ms. Bingman shared, we do have accelerated learning process coming in February, as well as some information on restorative practices. Ms. Yoho, we are confirming the availability of a presenter for that. Okay. So we think it'll be okay, but we have some double checking to do. And then if you look ahead to March for Mr. J and Ms. Johnson, March is a presentation where we bring forward any curriculum changes that we are going to be working on over the summer. So you would get an update from a number of specialists, perhaps, of either changes in a course that they want, a new course that they would like to pilot, or a pilot course that they want to make permanent, as well as any curriculum standards that are changing. And Ms. Yoho, if it's okay with you, I would like to add a presentation on that day for around Lexia Core 5, the new elementary language arts tool that we brought on, bring forward some data and give you some information about how that's gone in the midst of a pandemic. And I think you'll find that there's some really interesting information that we'll be able to bring forward. So if we can add that at that date, that would be great. Other than that, that's all I have.
Okay, you said that was to the March agenda. Very good.
Yes, March agenda.
Excellent. And I just wanted to point out, oh, Linda, did you have something to say?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to, at this time, to mention that we wanted to add in June a presentation for a district committee on assessments, if that's okay with the committee. And then I also noticed in April would be an advanced academics update, but we just did the gifted and talented. So I'm assuming that the one in April then can be removed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And that was likely in the schedule. Again, we do regular updates. And sometimes we move them around, but we kind of telescope them out for the year. In this case, we got to it sooner. So we can just take that one off of there, I would think.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed.
I wanted to point out one thing that earlier with languages, that is the life of an secondary elective teacher. They live and die on which school they're at, to some extent on the popularity of their course. When I was in high school, Hardly anybody took Spanish. It was French and German. These things are cyclical. They're by school. They're by teacher, popularity. So that is the life of a secondary elective teacher. And it's a shame because we know some schools don't have choirs and things like that we would love for them to all have. But my little soapbox there. Anything else for the good of the group? Thank you so much. We did it. I watched that clock. So thank you. See some of you later.
Have a good day.